Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as always by my Firewalk merch-wearing co-host, Tucker Hazel. And look at that, he's got the water bottle too. He's got the water bottle. Show the logo, show the logo.
Oh yeah.
Swell,
Oh
Firewalk
yeah.
Studios. It's actually a very sick hoodie, I
Yeah.
will say.
Oh yeah.
I will say, that's a sick hoodie. Tucker, I got a simple question for you today. Are all games the same?
Um, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say no. Is that how hot or cold am I?
I think you're probably warm on
Okay.
that one. You asked me to surprise you with the topic.
Correct.
Um,
It's been a while since
and
we've
I
done
did just
this.
that.
Yes.
Yes. I've been thinking a lot about a couple different games that have released recently,
Mm.
namely Mario Party Jamboree, which I don't think we're gonna do a whole video on. This
Yeah.
isn't really a topic about Mario Party, but it came from Mario Party.
Sure. As most good things do.
Yes. Um, I think at this point, friend of the show, because I think Jake has put on NS. Did that get
Yeah,
recorded
it
yet?
got recorded, but it's not up yet. Yeah. But yes.
Okay, well, friend of the show, Jake, go check out Jake's Substack. He's a
Jake
fantastic
Steinberg.
writer. I love everything he writes. Yes, I should have said his last name. It wasn't
Yes.
useful giving any Jake. When Mario Party Jamboree came out, he was waiting
Jake
into the
of Finn
discourse
and
about the.
Fame.
He was waiting to the discourse about that like one low Eurogamer review. I was
Yeah.
doing the same.
Mm-hmm.
This was pre-release, post-release. I remember he streamed the game and then made a tweet like, "Oh yeah, I've been playing this and it's good, but like this isn't any higher than a seven.
Yeah.
Like, why are we rewarding this kind of iteration?" I think is what he said.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a similar sentiment from Jordan Miner,
Sure.
who's a writer of a really cool book about the
Yes.
best video games from each year, who reviewed the game. I think it was for PC Gamer, who also gave it a seven. And his quick tweet about sharing his review is to the effect of like, or actually is his Blue because it's
Yeah.
over on
Yeah.
Blue Sky. It was like, yeah, Mario Party Jamboree is as good as Mario Party gets, which is a seven.
Yeah.
And this isn't really a discussion about either Mario Party or review scores, but it's kind of like a springboard into a larger topic of conversation for me, which is the idea of what any person carries into a game when
Sure.
they start it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm curious to hear from you, Tucker, is when you're jumping into a game, then when you're coming out the other side, you're appraising it, you're figuring out how much did I enjoy this game.
Yeah.
Are you entering all of those games with the same set of criteria, or
Mm-hmm.
is there a little bit more flexibility there? Because I look at Jamboree and I say, yeah, this is better than any Mario Party that ND Cube has arguably ever
Yes,
released
I think that's
ever
fair
since
enough.
taking it
Yeah.
from Hudson. And so to me, that's still I think it's a fair assessment to say that like even the best Mario Party game on some sort of objective metric
hmm
is like it's like a 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah.
But that to me that's not the quality of Mario Party Jamboree. The
Yeah.
quality of Mario Party Jamboree is actually much higher. I think it's an exceptional game
hmm
because I come into it thinking, okay, this is Mario Party. It's
Yeah.
never going to be anything other than Mario Party, and indeed, it is the best version of that.
Yeah.
And there's also people disappointed with Black Ops 6, which we
Sure.
can talk about a little bit. And I look at Black Ops 6, I'm like, well, this is just an extraordinary package.
hmm
It's very iterative, yes, but again, I didn't come into Black Ops 6 expecting that wheel to be taken off the bus and replaced with an
Yeah.
entirely different functioning
You just
wheel.
want to watch that wheel on the
So
bus go round and round. You know what
yeah,
I'm saying?
but there's times when it's the inverse, right? I mean, you look at a big game like I don't know, you look at 3D World when that came out,
Sure.
Mario 3D
Yeah.
World, and I wanted that to be more.
hmm
I wanted that to be the next big revolution for Mario. So this is all a long way of saying for me, I don't think that it's right to, or at least I don't, come into every game expecting the same thing or even judging the quality of them in the same way.
Sure. Yeah. In terms of every game existing in its own context of its own developer, its
Yeah.
own series, and the time in which it's releasing, the system on which it's releasing, I think it's very fair to create a unique set of criteria for each game. And I actually
Yeah.
remember a pretty big Twitter discourse earlier this year about what criteria people use going into a game. This was from the
Yes.
point of view of someone who created sort of a spreadsheet, sort of mathematical formula. I believe they were reviewing Senua's Saga
Hellblade.
Hellblade 2. But Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Can we please be categorical here?
Right, I apologize.
In which they like gave each element of the game a score out of 10, then used that sort of average to say that that's the score they would give the game. And obviously, that's something that people quite bristled at, especially in the game's journalism sphere that want discussion to be the driving factor of why someone is coming to a review. And I actually think this is an interesting opportunity here to basically just make this a conversation about reviews, what we see the purpose of
Yeah.
reviews, how we review any given game, because it's also something I've been thinking a lot about in when I play a game or watch a film that is similar to what came before, and similar to what you said about Mario Party. I play an interesting game in my head when I'm thinking about my thoughts on it versus someone else's thoughts and trying to place it in the context of like, how experienced are you with a series, a genre, a style, a director,
Yeah.
anything? Because the again, this is something that's been rattling around in my head a lot, and so I'm glad you brought up this topic. I often feel that the slight against iteration rather than revolution, or innovation rather, iteration versus innovation, people place a slide
Yeah.
so heavily on innovation as a requirement for something to be truly great in a way that I think isn't quite fair, because most people making most things are not aiming to completely reinvent things, but rather make their own take on it. And
Yeah.
whether it's their first time doing it or their second time doing it, there's an effort that goes into just making something. And there's an extra layer of effort that I think is maybe kind of an unfair bar to place on things, where you have to completely reinvent things in order for it to be appreciated, respected, important. But I think that something like Mario Party is a good example of why should that be innovative. I would certainly
Yeah.
enjoy an innovative Mario Party game, but the intent of Mario Party is to service a niche, to service a
Yeah.
market, an appetite that people have for something that is fun with a family, that brings back memories of something that they've been playing for a long time, and you can place that same context on anything that is just an iteration on what came before. I think that there should be sort of different sets of criteria we have going into approaching things of why was this made, and does it meet the criteria or the goals in which it was made underneath, rather than
Yeah.
placing as I said, I think sort of unfair bar of this has to be revolutionary or innovative in order to be considered high quality, or like, game of the year caliber, favorite, whatever, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because last night we were playing this game called Web Fishing, which kind of reinforced the intrigue of this topic in my head.
Sure.
Because web fishing is, be blunt about it, it's Animal Crossing and a short hike put together with this like online lobby system, essentially, where you're just catching fish and there's funny little guys you interact with, and you dress up in funny ways, and that's the game.
Yep. And it's $5 on Steam.
Yeah, and it's great. I really think web fishing is a lot of fun. We were
Yeah.
playing with your brother last night and just catching big fish, and it was stupid, and it was cute, and it was exactly what it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that that's bad. Like, I
Yeah.
think you can look at web fishing and be like, okay, well, it is simply aping the feel and aesthetic of a short hike, and it's
Yeah.
simply aping so many dimensions of Animal Crossing.
Correct. Yes.
And
Even the wolf character, like there's two character archetypes, the cat and the wolf.
Yeah.
The wolf one just looks like the wolf Animal Crossing characters.
Well, and the cat just looks like Rover or Anka, and I know you love Anka. But in reality, I think I look at that game and I'm like, well, it's not the same for me as appraising a new Animal Crossing game.
Yeah.
The objectives behind this game are quite different.
Yeah.
And I feel similarly about Call of Duty, which is to say that I apply the same logic to every scale of development.
Sure. Yeah, I see.
I look at Black Ops. I look at Black Ops 6. I'm like, well, you could make an argument that they could sell each component element of this as its own game. You can sell this 8 to 10 hour campaign by itself. You can sell this big zombies mode by itself, multiplayer by itself. These are 3 big games. They're very iterative, but that's what COD is. It's this ultimate yearly package. There's a reason why it's the highest selling thing every year. And indeed, it does innovate in some ways with the Omni movement or whatever, but in the broad strokes, you can just say it's Call of Duty again, and that's true, but that is in fact what Call of Duty should be.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. And I I agree with you that sort of a tendency to want everything new every time
Hmm.
is in some ways also just antithetical to the ways you get to really good ideas.
Yeah, sure.
Like you think about a game like Ghost of Tsushima, it's a very good game. I like it a lot. You
Yeah.
like it a lot. I wouldn't say it's in the best games on PS4, but
Hmm.
I think you can make a very strong case that Ghost of Yotei very possibly might be
Mm.
from Sucker Punch.
Yeah.
Best games on PS5 because they'll have that time to iterate on their framework. But then where it gets tricky for me is I say, well, it's been so long,
Yeah.
right?
And that's
That
certainly the
man,
framework that a
fuck.
lot of people are going to place Ghost of Yotei under. I think that you're right.
Yeah,
And there is, I think, a lot of value in building
yeah,
on what came before and making sequels. And actually, this is something, again, I keep bringing this up, but something I've been thinking about a lot recently as a interesting online discourse that I've seen recently is besmirching something simply because it's a sequel and saying that that
yeah,
cannot be considered one of the great games of this period because it's not at face value new. Whether that means it is in the way that a 3D Mario sequel is a totally new game, someone might say because that is in the Mario world or a Zelda game is in the Zelda world, Zelda IP, that because it's not a brand new IP, brand new world, that it is lesser than in some ways is obviously a very broad generalization that comes from
yeah,
people who are just whining to whine online. But I think we're kind of connecting a dot here where some people
yeah,
take the idea of something being a sequel as a negative. And we've seen quite a bit of that with PS5 games in a way that I think is kind of unfair. And you can agree or disagree on specific examples.
yeah,
But watching Guerrilla and Sony Santa Monica and Insomniac make direct sequels, very iterative sequels on some of their games from PS4, and I think across the board, basically improve on them in every way. A lot of people say, "Well, this, they're reusing the same boat animation from God of War 2018. That we're just doing a third Spider-Man game. Oh my God, Horizon's just being beaten into the ground." When the
yeah,
reality is, these big teams with these worlds, it's important for them to not start from the ground up every single time. And I think that there is value and I think praise in the small changes. When I play Spider-Man 2 or God of War Ragnarok, and because I'm informed by and experienced with the previous iterations of those series, I'm able to see here's where the changes were made for better and
yeah,
occasionally for worse. But I respect and enjoy those games, regardless of if they look and play mechanically similarly. Uh, I do appreciate continuation and iteration and
yeah.
evolving in small ways because I think there's equal value in that, to be honest.
And this is where it gets tricky, right? Because what, as I was given the example of Ghost of Yotei, right? I think there's a strong chance that the game is going to be exceptional because it's the sequel.
Yeah, yeah,
But
exactly.
as when the game was revealed, I looked at that personally as like, well, man,
Yeah,
we've been waiting so long. We will have gone 5 years between Sucker Punch
yeah.
games. Obviously, the Iki Island was in there, but that even sort of solidifies the point even more. For me, I'm like, man, I've waited all this time, and I'm just gonna get a better version of the thing I
Hmm.
already thought was really good.
Yeah,
And I think that's where it gets challenging because you know with Mario Party, if I'm getting a Mario Party almost every year, and Mario Party is this thing that exists to be iterated on, I look at that very simply and I say, okay, this exists to be iterated on, and
yeah.
that's great, and that's fine. That's just what it needs to do.
Hmm.
But when I'm waiting years and years and years, as a player, my expectations are built up to where I'm going to get something. I don't know if different is the right word, but at least it's going to sort of feel fresh
Yeah. No, I
in
agree with
some
you. Yeah,
respect.
yeah.
Mario Wonder being a good example. I mean,
Totally.
The framework of Mario Wonder with the Wonder Seeds is different than New Super Mario Brothers, but for all intents and purposes, it is fundamentally very similar
Yeah.
to a New Super Mario Brothers
Hmm.
game. But in reality, there's that twist on it
Hmm.
that to me is fantastic and what I needed as a player.
Yeah.
So it's sort of this weird space that I find myself in where I think, okay, I understand on a practical level, on a design level, on an art level, you want to do that sequel. I even feel that way about the books I make for Lost in Cult. Like,
Sure.
I'm proud of the handheld history book we made, but I'm even more proud of the Console Chronicles because I got to look back at what I did
Yeah.
with that last book and say, okay, here's all the things I know I can do better and different and make something even
Yeah.
cooler.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like expectations build with that
Totally.
time, I think. And I think that that's where we find ourselves in this precarious position of people, well, the people online who are saying all these games are just sequels and thus bad, they are also stupid.
Yes.
But if we take their criticism charitably in an imaginary world where that's possible, I think it is fair to say that when you compound long development times with games that then feel too similar, it's understandable why this problem emerges, I think.
I think so. And I think what's interesting about that is I think it's because the standards for what to expect over any given amount of time, like literal years of your life wise, is
Yeah.
still based in development timelines of the past, in which,
Yeah.
let's just use Sucker Punch as an example, because I think Ghost of Yotei is a really interesting thing. Obviously, we haven't played that game. We actually know really little about it. But
Maybe a 4 to 10.
it could be a 4 out of 10. I think it's unlikely, but it's possible. But if we take Sucker Punch, for example, they have done 3 IP. I guess technically they did Rocket Robot on Wheels on the N64 before Sly Cooper, but they've done 3 IP with Sony. They did a trilogy of Sly Cooper games. They did a trilogy of Infamous games, and now they have done one continuing into 2 Ghost games. And the difference in the perception of Ghosts of Yotei versus Sly 2, Infamous 2, is that Sly 2 came out, I don't exactly know, but probably about 2 years after Sly Cooper and Thieves
And
and Raccoonus. And Infamous 2 came out 3 years after Infamous 1. And so the difference in timescale is that you expect, in the traditional sense, a sequel, even if it is largely similar, to come out in a quicker period of time.
3 years.
2 years. Yeah, okay, I was right. But we're at the point in time where Ghost of Tsushima is such a large, visually polished game, technically sound, lots of voice acting, high resolution textures, tons of environment variety, motion capture, voice acting, that and that's a great game. Both of you and I really like Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah.
But if you want a sequel to Ghost of Tsushima, you cannot get a sequel to Ghost of Tsushima in 2 years. It's not possible
Yeah.
because
Or you
then
can, but it's called E.T. Island, and it's
it's
like a
true.
tiny
Yeah,
little
yeah.
sliver of a thing.
Yeah, and that's
If
kind
you
of
want
what
that full
DLC
game, you have
has.
to wait.
That's what
Yeah.
DLC has filled in. But then the interesting thing about Ghost of Yotei is it's not the Spider-Man 2 God of War Ragnarok where you're reusing the same map, you're reusing the same character, same combat elements. As far as we know, Ghost of Yotei is set in an entirely new map, which means from the ground up, new environment design, new art direction. It's set in a new time
Yeah.
period, so that is new world research to do, like because these are based in historicity. A new protagonist to write, new side quests to write. This is all intents and purposes a brand new game. It is built on the same engine as Ghost of Tsushima, at least we can assume. It probably is aping some of the same mechanics, riding a horse, following the wind, general combat structure, general pacing. But Ghost of Yotei is a from the ground up built new game. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is true of Ghost of Tsushima. Or, sorry, that is true of Sly 2. That is true of Infamous 2. But those games were built with far less texture resolution, smaller maps, smaller draw distances, everything that goes into making an older game versus a newer game. It's an unfair comparison to expect
Yeah.
a even quote unquote direct sequel, which is interesting because Ghost of Yotei kind of isn't that, to come out in the same time period because the games are just different. And so I think I try, because I know what you're feeling about, like, oh, Ghost of Yotei, it's like, oh, it's just another Ghost game. It's been 5 years. Oh, but like the PS4 is still kind of just hanging on. Like all these games are sequels. I
Yeah.
feel that as well. But I think I try to divorce myself a little bit from that and place myself in the development mindset of the people making these games who made Sly 1, 2, and 3, and Infamous, Infamous 2, and Infamous Second Son, and Infamous Last Light, and Infamous Festival of Blood. Like they were able to iterate on these things. And with Ghost of Tsushima, which is their best-selling game and best reviewed game by a pretty significant margin, they're like, well, yeah, this is a great game, but Okay, we can learn a little bit from the environment variety and from the enemy variety, from mission variety. Okay, we want to polish this up a little bit. We want to add these things to the combat, maybe a different kind of traversal. Let's make a sequel. But we can't just make it Jin on Tsushima again with the same map because this is based on a real place, and you can't just add an area to an actual
Yeah.
island in historical Japan. And so, okay, we got to make a new island. Oh, well, that's a lot of work. And well, the story on this island pushes us to make it in a different time period. So we got to do all this new research. And like there's like domino effect things where you're like,
Yeah.
look, if you want this to happen, it's going to take serious work that simply cannot be done to the level of quality that Sucker Punch operates on in a 2 or 3 year time period. And if it is, then that's what happened to Spider-Man and Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2. But then people complain about those games because they're based on the same map, but it's Spider-Man. Where the fuck else is he gonna go? So like there's just it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I think all of these scenarios where
Yeah.
what do players want? And what do we want? You and I, we're very into video games. We follow all of these, we follow the release cadences. What do we want from each of these things? There's paths where we can see enjoying both options, but then we're somewhere in the middle where it's like neither one is fully satisfying us.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it goes back to this initial question I asked you a little bit as a joke of,
Our game's the
are
same.
all games the same?
Yeah.
Because I think to myself about Ghost of Yotei, and then I think to myself about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond.
Yeah.
Every single thing in the Metroid Prime 4 Beyond trailer, in my opinion, exists to illustrate one point.
Yes.
This is the same Metroid Prime you played in 2007.
Yeah. In
The
2001,
cadence,
frankly.
yeah, the cadence of the combat is the same. Scanning is the same. The way Samus's visors works is seemingly the same. Salix is back, so at least to some extent the plot is going to be the same. This is Metroid Prime again.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is I think it was my friend Chris Schilling, who's now working with us at Lost and Cult. He was saying on Twitter when Metroid Prime 4 got shown off, something to the effect of like, "Oh wow, I thought there'd be more."
Mm-hmm.
When we saw Metroid Prime 4, I thought there'd be a little bit something new to this.
Yeah.
I remember being frustrated by that take of like, yeah, but it's been so long. I've been waiting for it will literally be. I'm putting Federation Force aside for the
Yeah.
sake of this point, but from 2007 to 2025, is that
18 years.
18 years?
Yeah.
That's fucking insane.
Yeah.
That there's an entire birth to adulthood's
Yeah.
worth of time between these games, and what I want is I want another Metroid Prime
Yeah.
game.
That
I
doesn't
don't
completely
want
upset
it
the
to
apple
be.
cart. Yeah.
I don't want it to be different at all.
Yeah.
And so,
And then you see Ghost of
therein
Yotei, which comes 5 years later, and you're like, this is too similar.
and therein lies the issue,
Yeah.
right? And it actually connects to I had two topics I was maybe going to bring up
Sure.
with you.
We can save the other one for another time if you want to pitch me another topic I'm not familiar
Well, actually, I think they're going to
with.
intersect.
Okay, fine enough. Fair enough.
The other topic I was thinking about was what does it mean to be a good advocate for the future of gaming?
Okay.
And this is where I think the topics meet, because in reality, the truth of the matter of are games the same to me is no, they're not. Because some games I like more than others,
Yes.
and the ones I like, I want to stay exactly the same, and the ones that I think have room for improvement, I want them to change.
Correct.
That's the truth.
Yes.
And so this is where I think being a good advocate enters the picture, which is to say, from my POV, being a good advocate for games and the future of games is doing exactly what you just did in the example of Ghost of Yotei and looking at the past work of the studio, which is to take a step back and say, here's the reality of how these games are made and why they're made and who's making them and why their past work is not the same as the current work, why those timescales are different and all of that.
Yeah.
And lay out the case and sort of set the tenor for the discourse to put into context why Ghost of Yotei is the game that it is.
Yeah.
To me, that's a very important advocacy for the future of games. A higher degree of understanding about how games are made and why. And I think if you know that and you can operate for that framework, I think you and I can both then admit our own biases and say, well, in reality, for me, I just want more Metroid Prime. Been waiting most of my waking life for it. Just give it to me again. I can say that and recognize why I feel that way, and also recognize why the game is the way that it is, and the way that Yotei is the way that is. So I think it's critical in a conversation like this to understand that there really is nothing beyond the type of game you like that
Mm.
dictates, in my opinion, how you approach
Yeah,
these kind of conversations. And all that really matters is understanding the context of the game. It's the same with Mario
absolutely.
Party. Going back to Mario Party, the context of that, Nintendo Cube exists to make these games.
Yeah,
As you were saying, they exist to fill this family friendly niche, to tackle this one series, sometimes go make a Clubhouse games, sometimes make a Wii Party, but they're here to do this.
yeah,
And it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to criticize them for not making a type of game that they were never going to be never be told to make by Nintendo.
yeah,
So I think that's an important dimension of the conversation.
yeah. I think people try too hard to apply the same logic to everything. Of oh, if this studio can do this, then why isn't every studio doing something similar? You can
Yeah.
see this in in people's desire for new IP. And they'll point at certain studios that are consistently generating new concepts and say, "Wow, look how good they're doing it. Why isn't Nintendo Cube, just for an example, why
Hmm.
aren't they doing this?"
Yeah.
But I think you're right about on us and to the level that we do, understanding production realities and development realities of games, and realizing that there's a lot of pressures and factors that go into the decisions to make every game. We might see Mario Party Jamboree as a foregone conclusion of a game, but the reality is they pitched a design doc for that. They thought about
Yeah.
this after making Clubhouse Games because that was their previous game. No, I guess that was
No
2020.
superstars.
Superstar. So Superstars was the last one. But if you think about it, actually, those two games are interesting because
Technically, everybody wanted to switch.
fuck me.
Sorry,
You know, you're right. Okay, you know what? I don't even know what I'm.
I just saw
I
Horace
honestly.
behind you. So
Is he there? Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's no, it's there. It's somewhere back there. But I lost my train of thought.
design document. They had to pitch the design
Yes,
document.
true.
I agree that they had to do that. No, I mean, if I can just take that and just imagine what you're going to say next and
Yeah,
respond to it,
sure.
that there certainly is a world where and where Nintendo Cube is like, well, and I actually made a tweet about this before Jamboree came out. I was like, my tweet was like, I'm really excited for Jamboree, although I would love if every year or every 18 months or 2 years whenever we get a new Mario Party game, it was just like a totally different style of game. Like
Yeah,
one year it's based off of Clue, and the next year it's based off of like Risk,
yeah, yeah.
and then it's based off of chess. I mean, I don't know. Like they just come up with
Sure.
all kinds of different Mario spins on archetypes of board games, like
Yeah, that'd
how
be really
Mario
cool.
Party has always been an archetype of Monopoly,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. Interestingly,
Candyland.
when my family plays Monopoly, we do like little mini games after everybody rolls the dice. Like sometimes we throw eggs at each other or
Yeah,
things.
yeah, you know.
Um, there's a challenge in what we're saying of sort of having a defeatist attitude of like, well, this is what the type of game they're going to make. Um, so there's no point in like trying to advocate for it to be a different type of game.
Yeah,
And that's not really my point either.
yeah, sure.
And I don't want it to seem like that is the point because there's obviously great utility in as a critic saying, "Hey, look, this is really good, but ultimately we're on what the Jamboree is probably like the 16th or 17th Mario
Yeah, yeah,
Party game. Um, God, fuck, please, Jesus Christ, give us a different type of game. I
yeah.
understand making that criticism, and I think it's a useful one to make. And this is where it gets confusing again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's a good criticism to make, is that not also great advocacy for the future of
Mm-hmm.
that series
Yeah,
and illustrating a player demand for something different and maybe giving ND Cube when they're Nintendo Cube more evidence for when they pitch their next title to Nintendo, saying, "Hey, look at this! Look at these reviews!
yeah,
Look at all this fan outcry. We did some real market research, and we see that there's room for people to enjoy and buy a different type of Mario Party game because these people have been saying these things online.
mm.
We think it suggests that X number of million people would be up for a Mario Party game
Yeah.
based on
Because we saw
Stratego."
3 million tweets about this.
Yeah, and I understand that again. This is very silly. It's a very unintellectual hypothetical in some ways, but I just think it's fine for Mario Party to just be Mario Party every time.
Yeah.
And it's fine to acknowledge that that is just simply what Nintendo Cube in 9 out of 10 realities are going to make. In the
Yeah.
10th reality, they're rebooting Tube Slider. But at 9 out of
Yeah.
10 of them, they're going to just make another Mario Party. And that's fine. And I think you can look for innovation elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I like so much about studying and being aware of the breadth of the modern games ecosystem is that any issue that you have with any given studio, any given series, any given genre, you can find a solution to that fixes your issue somewhere else. If you are I think reasonably frustrated with bloating development timelines and budgets, you can find games that don't reflect that, and you can find hundreds
Yeah.
of them and hundreds of great ones in the modern ecosystem. If you are tired of IP, whether that's Pokemon or Mario or Call of Duty or FIFA or whatever, being continually pushed over decades, and you want something that has a totally fresh identity, whether on a gameplay set or not, it succeeds in that. That's something else. But you can
Yeah.
find new IP games. Maybe they are from smaller studios, or maybe, and this is again something I also have been thinking about a lot lately, going to find the new IP that wasn't majorly successful but did try something new. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people look at the slate of the modern games industry and look at how long-standing and successful so many series are. Mario, Zelda, Call of Duty, Pokemon, things that have existed for a long time and are in their umpteenth iteration, and say, where are the new IP? While in the same breath, placing the expectations of a long-running polished series that has had years and years to iterate on things like Forspoken and Callisto Protocol and Starfield and these things that are new ideas in new worlds doing the thing that you
Yeah.
want to make a new IP, but aren't the 17th Mario game that had someone working on it from the past that was able to learn from all these mistakes. I think people need to let their guard down a little bit and say, look, if I want a new IP, I can't expect it to be a new IP on the par of quality of Tears of the Kingdom or Resident Evil 4 or
Yeah.
the fifth Elder Scrolls game or the fourth Fallout game or whatever. Like there are all these series that are long-standing and have been able to iterate over time, and then people are disappointed when a new IP doesn't have that same kind of polish. Like, well, that's a totally new writing team. This is their first time making that world. These are the first time these mechanics and this environment and these characters have ever existed. Of course, it's not going to come out the gate as fully formed. And then you can look back at things like Sonic 1 and Mega Man 1. And those are fine games, but they're not great games. And they're not what people remember them as, because Mega Man 2 and Sonic 2, coming out a year later, 2 years later, whatever it was, were able to learn from those mistakes. And so you can imagine a Callisto Protocol 2, a Forspoken 2, a Starfield 2. Yeah, those are going to take a lot longer to come out, but maybe because Callisto Protocol is a pretty damn good game, I think. I like Starfield a lot. You can imagine a Starfield 2 that is to Fallout New Vegas, what Fallout 3 was, like whatever, like the next one down the line that improves upon it. That's not a very good example because that's not a new IP. But I think you
That
see
was
what I'm.
different definitions. I get your point.
Yes,
You raised something really important.
just now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to make the argument that indeed games as a whole are the same
Yeah.
across time
Yeah.
in some
Sure.
way. And I'm really glad you brought up Sonic the Hedgehog. But I want to think about like the sixth generation because there's a lot of love for the sixth generation. I mean, it is my favorite era of gaming.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of like we must return to this time, right? And there's it's no doubt true that a lot of the dominant IP of that era were new. Obviously,
Totally.
Halo was new. You know, any number of new IP were invented during this era, but
Many,
I think
many,
it's
many
also
such cases.
many such cases. I think it's also important to remember, though, throughout time, sequels have just sort of always been dominant,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
I mean, think about the way that the best-selling game on PS2 is GTA San
Yeah.
Andreas. There are three GTA games on PS2.
Yeah.
There's actually even more if you count the City Stories
Yes.
games that were
Correct.
on PSP that got ported to
Yeah.
PS2. That was the dominant force in that era. It was GTA, and indeed GTA wasn't even new to that generation.
Yeah.
Of course, in a practical sense, it kind of was because GTA 3 is a markedly different game than GTA 2,
Yeah.
but those existed prior.
Yeah.
If you
It,
look at let's go. Yeah,
I was gonna say something like Resident Evil that had 3 games, oh no, 4 games on PS1, and
yeah,
then on PS2 you got remakes and new games and spin-offs, and Metal Gear Solid that got 2 major new
yes,
games, and each of those games on PS2 got like fucking Persona 5 Royal ass, like Pokemon Platinum ass, like 2 years later
yeah. So,
fixed versions, and a remake of Metal Gear Solid 1. If that happened now, people be like, Metal Gear's being driven into the ground. This is the fucking milking this IP for all it's worth. You can't do that
yeah,
nowadays.
you can make a really good argument that the most acclaimed game on PS1 and PS2 is both from Metal Gear. Metal Gear 1 and then either Metal Gear 2 or 3. People make cases for
Yeah,
either of
yeah.
them. Go back even earlier in time. How many Final Fantasy games came out on Famicom and NES?
Mm-hmm.
And then Final Fantasy VI, arguably the defining role-playing game of SNES, one
Yeah.
of the defining games of the platform writ large.
Mm-hmm.
I just
Final
think,
Fantasy is an interesting one though because that strikes a very fascinating balance. Where, and I was actually talking to Bo about this recently.
yeah,
They could call every new Final Fantasy game something else. They could
yeah.
just come up with a new fucking horseshit name. They could call it Fantasia Neo Dimension if they fucking wanted to, and
Oh,
and
the last story.
or yeah, exactly, or the last story, and it would be a new IP because every time there's a new Final Fantasy game, other than a Sid, a Moogles, a Chocobo, a Summons, a Chocobo, it's a new fucking world. This is a new set of
Yeah,
characters and new mechanics, but that's a long-standing series with IP recognition. But also
exactly.
Final Fantasy has always been about changing and completely from the ground up reinventing what the combat is, what the characters are, how the growth of the characters work. And then you get to something like Final Fantasy 16, which is a continuation of that in that it is a new combat style, which every mainline Final Fantasy has ever had, and a new set of characters and a new world. But the people are like, this is my Final Fantasy. This is too different, which is fascinating. Sometimes it's too different,
Yeah.
even though Final Fantasy 16 is continuing the legacy with the same creators of all these fucking Final Fantasy games. But it's also a new
Well,
IP,
and
or it's an old IP, but it's kind of a new IP.
well, it reinforces the point really that sequels have always been the driver behind the industry,
Yeah.
right? Because you're
There are
correct. They could
4
have done
Mario
that. I mean,
2D platformers on NES. There are 4 of them. That's insane.
yeah, and then we launch SNES with Super Mario World,
Yeah.
and a lot of people still say Super Mario World's the best game on that platform.
Hmm.
The Sega Saturn failed in part because it had no real Sonic game.
Yeah.
Now it had Sonic Jam, and that had a 3D overworld, and I wish every day of my life that that style of 3D Sonic had actually come to
Yeah.
exist
Yeah.
outside of a hub world. But this is such fucking stupid insider baseball; it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The point being, a lot of this is also proximity to nostalgia, right?
Mm.
Because a lot of I mean, I have fucking 1,200 pages of work testifying to the fact that I basically spend my working day looking and studying games history,
Yeah.
right? All around me. And I can tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, the current state of the industry is really not different than the industry in the past.
Yeah.
There are, of course, marked
Yeah.
changes
Of course.
in terms of time scale, in terms of budget,
Hmm.
and things like that, 100%. But it's always been true that the primary driver of hardware was flashy technical fidelity.
Yes.
It's
Exactly.
always been about pushing fidelity.
Yep.
When the ColecoVision came out, it was about pushing fidelity. It was about whose version of Donkey Kong was the best.
Hmm.
It was always about sequels. It is simply important to acknowledge your bias in the
Yeah.
situation,
Totally.
because the more you zoom out, the more you look at games as a larger artistic tradition, the more you come to realize that we just repeat the same
Absolutely.
cycles.
Yeah.
And so games are the same in many
Yeah,
ways.
no, I think
While they
we
are
came around to
different,
the
they're
other
also the
end.
same.
Yeah, we came around to the other end because I think that you're right. The sort of it's something that I've kind of I guess I mean I'm very young. I've only been thinking about this as seriously as I have been for maybe 4 or 5
You're
years at
Unk.
this point. I am, uh, but I've come to peace with the fact that things are largely the same when you sort of
Yeah.
divorce yourself from the current context of things. And I just find it fascinating to do these like mental challenges with myself. Okay, I have this issue with the way that games are made now, sequelized now, annualized now, monetized now. And then I tried to think, when did this start? What are the analogs of the past that caused
Yeah.
us to get to this point? And when I do genuinely believe, as you zoom out, as you're saying, you start to realize that that most of these issues, the complaints that people have been levying, have existed for the majority of games history in some form or fashion, and these are just a new coat of paint on something old. But I also think that there is a pretty significant value in that,
Yeah.
in the putting a new coat of paint on something that's old, because there are always new people, whether that is developers or players, coming to anything, a genre, a series, making a game, playing a game. It's okay that Super Mario Bros. Wonder, to your point, though we would also, as big Mario fans, can attest to the fact that it is a reasonably revolutionary game within the scope of
Yeah.
2D Mario. But it's okay that it is not a complete reinvention of 2D Mario, because for millions of people, it is their first 2D Mario game. And so they do not come into it with the understanding or the history or the baggage, I guess, of there are a lot of similarities. And so I think that the criticism of things that are iterative or similar, even if it is a new IP similar to another genre or another more popular game, the criticism of, well, I don't appreciate this as much. I think that this is of less value because it is iterative, because it is similar, I think comes from mostly the fact that the people making those criticisms are, and this is not a good thing or a bad thing, but they are very experienced with and have a lot of history with playing games that are similar to this. But the reality is, when someone is making a new IP that is similar
Yeah.
in concept to an old IP, whether that is Callisto Protocol, Glenn Schofield makes Dead Space. More than a decade later, he makes Callisto Protocol. It's because he's trying to make Callisto Protocol for a new audience. He's not trying to make it for the Dead Space audience. He wants to get new fans interested in this kind of survival horror with this tone and the knocking off the legs
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, it's similar to Dead Space. He fucking made Dead Space, so that's okay. But I think that there is a value in repackaging something and tweaking it slightly, because its intent is not for people who have played 20 survival horror games to love Dead Space, but to make a new, or Callisto Protocol, I guess, to make Callisto Protocol, to expand what that is and appeal to a new
Yeah.
audience that doesn't have a long history with all of this.
Let me disagree with you actually about the
Okay,
Callisto Protocol thing.
sure,
I think Glenn Schofield made Callisto Protocol for people who play Dead Space.
sure.
And I feel the same way about Igarashi making Bloodstained
Mm.
for the people who play Castlevania.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that these spiritual successors exist to service an old fan
yeah.
base.
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
And
That
and I
might have not been
think
a good example of what the point I was trying to get across. It just what came
no,
to mind because I
but
played
no,
Callisto Protocol recently.
100%. But it's an important one nonetheless, because in servicing that old fan base, you are also opening the door to new ones,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
new players as well.
Hmm.
That's intrinsically true. So, yeah, I mean, I that's the other thing. I think it's fine for the premise of your game to also be, here is this thing again in a very
Totally.
deliberate way.
Yeah.
Even more so than a Mario Party Jamboree, where Mario Party Jamboree is not, the point of Mario Party Jamboree isn't to be like, man, wow, you love Mario Party. Here's more Mario Party. The premise of Jamboree, I think, is you play Mario Party. We made an exciting new iteration on it,
Yeah.
which is a
We made a
slight
Mario
difference.
Party. You play a Mario Party. This is the
And
formula.
it's like it's an appeal to why, even though you already own probably Super Mario Party,
Yeah.
why you also need Jamboree.
Hmm.
You look at a game like Callisto Protocol, or I think much more saliently a game like Bloodstained, and it says, you love Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Yeah.
You want another Castlevania Symphony of the Night. The premise of this game is, we're just going to make another Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and
Yeah.
you're going to enjoy it because it's that. And I think that's fine too. And again, it all comes back to, our games the same, are our games different? You have to meet a game, in my opinion, on the premise that it puts forth
Sure.
to some degree.
Yeah.
You
No, I
don't
agree.
have to entirely. At a certain point,
You don't have to enjoy it, but I think you have to meet it there.
yeah, you have to at least understand its premise,
Totally.
and you can then look at it and say, well, this is a silly premise.
Yeah.
Paper Mario fans have done this for a very long time, and but you got to understand why it is the way it is. I was thinking about this when I was playing. Like, here's my example.
Mm,
I replayed Halo 4 recently.
sure.
Halo 4 is disliked for a number of reasons that I think are quality related.
Hmm.
The script is not great,
Yeah.
but
What's a Halo game?
a lot of the reason Halo 4 is disliked is because it is more linear,
Yeah.
it is more cinematic,
Hmm.
both down to minute ways. Like the way
Oh, sorry. I just
I
sal
I
started
was
salivating a little bit. Hold on.
I was gonna text you about this.
It's the
You have
next
so
one,
much shit
guys.
you have so much shit to play, and I understand that it's the guy mining for the diamonds
Yes.
he's never gonna reach. But I truly do think you would like Halo 4 and Halo 5 a lot.
I'm going to play them. I'm going to play them. I
Plays really great on Steam Deck as a
how many
sidebar.
fucking Kirby games did I play?
Yeah, I really, even more so than Reach, I really think you would like Halo 4.
Yeah.
But you have to look at Halo 4 and you have to say, okay, well, 343 was coming in to put their own stamp on things. They're
Yeah.
also coming in to make a Halo game reflective of the
Yeah.
era it was released in.
And they're also
And
coming
when
in
you
to
do
make
that,
their first original game.
yeah,
And so you can't expect it to be Halo 3 levels of writing quality and world building. I don't even know all the necessarily criticisms. That's their third. No, I guess it was their fourth. No, wait. Did ODST come out before or after? Whatever. But it was not their first
after.
Halo game.
Yeah, and but so I look at Halo 4 and I say, okay, well, Halo 4 and Halo 3 are not the same.
Yeah.
The context of these games are very different. Now, I can look at this and say, okay, I don't prefer the more cinematic traditional FPS framework of Halo 4, and I prefer indeed the way that Infinite stepped back away from that. However, I understand why
Yeah.
343 made the game this way, and through that lens, I can appreciate the game's construction. I can
Exactly.
appreciate it as at that time Microsoft's most expensive game ever. I can appreciate the fidelity of the presentation. I can appreciate the differences in the formula.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean I prefer them. Doesn't mean I have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
look at the premise and say the premise is the be all end all. But I understand the premise and I view the game through the premise and respond to it off of that
Sure.
basis.
Yeah.
So that again, it goes back to this idea of good advocacy. I think
Yeah.
because I think it's just wrong-headed to if I had been there in 2012, if I was like, fuck this, this is not, it doesn't play like Halo 3, it's not operating from in
Yeah.
the same framework. That I just don't think that that's useful
Sure.
at all. And I think that, in fact, if I can make this an even broader point, my biggest problem with most gaming discourse is that I think most of it is just not useful.
Sure. Yeah.
I think
Well, it's because
it's
mostly the people
driven.
making arguments aren't particularly informed, and it's not necessarily their fault because it requires a passion and research that you and I both have in order to be able to understand games on the level that is sort of external to just a moment to moment
Yeah,
player interaction experience. And that's how most people play games. And that is something I can't besmirch people too much for. But we took a little break for a second and I went to the bathroom and I was using it. I'm not going to get into the detail, but
you're a user.
I'm a user. And I had a thought about us trying to parse the criticisms of games and where decisions go into making a game in any form that comes to appease criticisms, because that's usually what happens when you are creating a new game.
Yeah,
You're making a design document like, okay, what things do people want? What things do people not want? Which audience are we going to gear this to? What things are we going to change or keep the same from previous games we made or previous games we've played to put our own spin on it, but to also make sure that it's similar enough? And I was sitting there, I was thinking, man, what's really, really relevant to game development is the Barbie speech about how about
sure.
how in Barbie it is women can't be too thin, they can't be too fat, they can't be too loud, they can't be too quiet. And game development is also that in a certain way. You can't make a new IP because then you're abandoning an old IP. But you can't continue an old IP because then you're not doing something new. And you can't make a game with too high fidelity because then that takes too long to come out. But you can't make a game that's low fidelity because that's not better than what came before. And they're like, it's all gray areas. It's all annoying
Yeah.
extremes that never pleases anyone. And it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. In any given thing that we've presented, you
Yeah.
can't be 343 making your first Halo game because then you're not Bungie making a who's made plenty of Halo games. But you can't also be Bungie because you're just literally not Bungie. And it's like all these things. I just think in my head like, but then I also try to frame my own criticisms. Like, why do I dislike certain games? Are there things that I posit as criticisms that I should
Yeah.
then sort of step back from and realize that maybe within this framework that I'm trying to present, maybe that not even that is as valid as like my emotions would tell me it is. So it's definitely a tricky balance. What do you
I
think of
mean,
that
what
Barbie
if
thing
you?
though? You think that's fun?
No, that's very good. I think that's very good. That's your Zelda as a ransom letter for this video.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, one thing you've gotten me to do, which is funny, is you've
Okay.
gotten me to basically stop having any real conviction in objective criticism
Sure. It's
of
working.
games in particular. Of like, it's a combination of talking with you a lot in the ways that you poison my mind,
Yes.
and
Good.
also just like,
Sometimes a little poison is necessary.
yeah, sometimes a little poison necessary, and also having a career where a lot of my writing is simply about profiling. Sorry, about writing profiles about creators and just understanding their
Yes,
process.
yes.
Um, I look at a lot of games now and I'm like, well, if I don't like this, I think it's more a reflection of me than a reflection of the thing.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean you can't have very interesting conversations about why you don't like something.
Hmm.
I think we've had a number. I think a lot about us disagreeing on Tears of the Kingdom
Sure.
or many other number of games. But I find myself feeling less sure of any real objective criticism of decisions in an individual game.
Yeah.
I feel very assured in my criticism of industry level
Yeah,
things,
sure.
of development timescales and everything.
Hmm.
But I feel like the more you come to understand how games are made and why, the less space it feels like there is for objective criticism,
Yeah.
which sounds strange, but I think that's the truth. And that's part of why, as a format, I'm not crazy about reviews.
Hmm.
Um, my favorite reviewer actually is Geo over at Digital Trends,
Hmm.
whose pieces are usually about a lot more than just the game. He wrote a really interesting one about Sonic Shadow Generations the other day, and about half the piece is responding to the his frustration that Shadow Generations is really good,
Hmm.
and that it took Sonic Team a fucking decade to make a game like this.
Yeah.
And I think it's more useful. Again, I think a lot about discourse in terms of its
Sure.
usefulness to not be like, well, this thing is bad because I don't like it for this reason or whatever,
Yeah.
but to say, okay, well, I feel this certain way. Let's try to examine the larger conditions that led to this point,
Yeah.
and let's try to figure out, at least in context, why a thing is the way that it is.
Sure.
Pikmin 4 is a great example. I adore Pikmin 4. It's one of my favorite games ever.
Hmm.
It's not as good as Pikmin 1, the best Pikmin game ever,
Yeah.
but
Of
it's a
course.
very good game.
Naturally.
And when I look at criticisms I have of that game, I look at enemies not responding, and I'm like, well, this is supposed to be a more accessible game. I understand why the enemies don't respond.
Yeah.
I understand why the controls are different.
Yeah.
All of that makes sense. How am I really going to objectively criticize this thing?
Sure.
Because there's a reason why it is the way it is.
Hmm.
I was really moved by you telling Xalavier Nelson Jr. in the recent dev dive that you didn't like the S rank requirement.
Yeah.
And I was even more moved by his response to you, which
Yeah.
was like, I put this in here for a very good reason. I'm going to explain to you why.
Yeah.
To me, that wipes the criticism off the board in some
Totally.
ways. And that's and I think that makes talking about games very challenging and very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I like the kind of reviews that we do.
Yeah.
And why, even though I admire many, many people who write articles, especially reviews, and have done so, and I want to meet these people and I want to be friends with them. I I don't pursue it myself, even though I think I could
Yeah.
with the knowledge that I have. And it has been suggested to me by you a number of times to try my hand at writing a few reviews, writing a few articles, because I probably
Yeah.
could. And I probably could make them reasonably interesting. But I see my conversational ability and my ability to
Yeah.
change my mind on the fly and adapt as my strength in games criticism in the videos that we do, frankly, because when we're doing our Echoes of Wisdom review, and I only come up with this idea of it as a ransom note or as a toy box in response to some word that you mentioned, and it just keyed my mind
Yeah.
in. That I think is more valuable to me, and frankly helps me get my own point out better than
Sure.
if I were to just in a Google Doc type out 800 words about Echoes of Wisdom, a game I really like, but I never would have come out with that point. And so I disagree on the premise that I don't like reviews, or that
Sure.
I don't really say, but you're down on reviews. Your stock
Yeah, I am down
is
on
low.
reviews.
Your stock is low
Yeah.
because reviews are one of my favorite parts
Sure.
of games culture. And doing them myself through the lens of a conversation is maybe my favorite thing that I get a chance to do. And I know that there's a difference,
Yeah.
and I know that you view them slightly differently. But I also
Yeah.
think that sitting back and watching a a Greg Miller PSP game review from 2011 or whatever
Yeah.
has a lot of value to me, in that it acts as a time capsule, and that it acts as one person's view on a game when it was new in a way that can't be had now. And so while I might have some frustration about the reactionary nature of many reviews nowadays, because a lot of people, ourselves included, start off a movie review or a game review by putting it in the context of whatever godforsaken fucking discourse is
Yeah.
happening. And in our pre-release conversations about it and people's expectations of the review scores. And I often find that frustrating now. I was like, okay, why can't you just review the game for it is? But I also think that is something that I will look back on fondly 10 years from now when I've
Yeah.
forgotten the discourse, when I've forgotten the pre-release conversation, and then I go back and watch our whatever the hell review, and I spend 2 minutes up front kind of like, oh, so this happened, and then well, this is we were thinking it was going to go this way, and then it kind of didn't. It might feel like kind of like banal in the moment of like, oh, okay, everyone knows this, like you just get to the fucking talking. But I think it acts as an interesting time capsule in a way that I find value in.
Well, it's actually, I agree with you. I know, let me refine what I'm saying a little bit more. What I don't like are personally, what I really don't like are the more traditional reviews.
Sure.
I'm not like going to IGN anymore and being like, okay, what do they think about this game? Unless it's Logan Plant, because Logan's awesome and I like to read
Yeah,
whatever Logan writes. So that's a caveat to make there. But
naturally.
the point for me more so is that I'll return again to my opening question. Are games the same? I think in the eyes of your average stupid person in the gaming community, they are.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no shortage of, oh, IGN gave insert game a 7, IGN gave insert game a 9. And I look at this
That's
and
the
I
worst
say,
part of
okay,
discourse. That's the worst part.
100%. And I
It's
look
the
at this
most
and I say,
objectively
okay,
wrong. Fuck.
well, but here's where I might have an unpopular take. I understand that it's a function of low understanding
Yeah.
on behalf of the poster, but I also think it is a problem that needs to be fixed at the other end.
Okay.
It's a problem that I think needs to be fixed in the format of the review.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I like the hour-long form conversations is because I think they are, in some ways, a conscientious objection to the style of review that gets misconstrued.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's impossible to misconstrue a review because you have to sit down and you have to really listen and pay attention to what we say for 80 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same with Geo's reviews on Digital Trend. Yes, he puts a score at the top because that's the format of the site, but the score really means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, the score precedes the text, which I also like,
Mm.
because then you have to really get into his writing and you have to understand how he got to that number. And I think
Yeah.
it really forces you to get into ideas. And again, the ideas are almost always larger than the game itself.
Sure.
And I think that that's very useful. And I think that to me is sort of the future of reviews. Not um, the more traditional style, although I completely understand for both SEO reasons and shorthand reasons and all these different reasons why they are the way that they are, I get more value out of these more protracted and larger scale conversations.
Yeah. When was the last time you used a
Because
protractor?
oh, I don't know. I probably around the time that Metroid Prime 3 Corruption came out.
2007.
I had a cool protractor. It was gray and like lime green. Um,
Continue.
the larger point, yeah, no, I guess the larger point is just that I like these reviews that, in fact, don't treat all games as the same.
Yeah, definitely. The to sort of close this out, the
Yeah,
funny I giggled at something you were just saying because you posited this question at the beginning that again to elucidate the audience and to remind you because we mentioned it at the top, I was not informed of what the topic of this conversation would be, and I kind of wanted to challenge
yeah,
my sort of like video game conversational improv skills, which I feel like I'm pretty good at. But so
yeah,
I wasn't made aware of this, and then he asks this question that is intentionally kind of stupid, which is are all
yeah,
games the same? And then about partway through, my response is no, and then you agree, and then we talk about how games should be approached on their own metrics.
yeah,
But then we talk about how really the industry operates in cycles and how when you take a look at things from a sort of more macro level, you recognize that games are actually all the same. And then
yeah.
in what you just said, you're like, it's stupid to it requires low IQ to think that all games are the same. And so what we really have nailed down on here is nothing. We missed the nail.
Exactly.
But there never was a nail in the first place. That's what Big Nail is trying to teach is trying to
Like
convince
this
you
is
of.
like this is like a Black Ops plot.
Yeah. And if you rewind it and you play it backwards, you realize that I was telling a secret message this whole time. And if you look in the corner, if you
Wow.
look at this, like there's actually a code. If you scan the Wonderbook, you get secret information.
Man, I often think about how like hundreds of years ago there were just famous painters who in their lifetime like nobody gave a fuck about their work. And then like they died and like their work gets found later and like damn these were some of the best painters ever, you know?
Yeah.
That's gonna be us with BLB.
Yeah, probably.
So so the best way to get these interesting conversations out to people as quickly as possible is probably to kill ourselves.
To get into the masses, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, true. True enough.
If we kill
Or to
it,
get
if we kill
respect.
it, think about the spike in views we kill ourselves right now.
Maybe. Well, thanks for watching.
Hey everybody, sorry I fucked it up because usually there's a time to take a pause, but there's not. This is a now
This
and a
is hot.
boom. You know what I'm talking
Well,
about?
but apparently we're gonna edit it in post. So again, there's there's really no
Hey,
reason.
we're punchy and like it's radio.
Yeah, we're trying to bring back the good old days, you know. But so you're
Yeah.
admiring the new things I added back there because the top shelves are the same. But let's see, what do I have? I'm gonna try to do this with a tiny version on OBS and not turning around. So that I think that's Excite Bots.
Yeah.
That's definitely person centered walking.
Yeah. PTW.
Oh, that's Electroplankton, and then also I think Days Gone is back there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, and then Bloodborne, definitely Bloodborne. What the fuck is that? There's too much glare, I can't see. Can you tell what that
3DS
is?
game. 3DS game.
Oh, that's Pokemon
Pokemon
Moon.
X.
That's X. Okay, yeah, because Moon is here, then
Yeah.
Tearaway, and then
I can tell what that is. MMMM.
oh, that's Major Miner's Majestic March. Yeah, I packed up all my games except for these.
Well, when did you hit record?
At one! Are you fucking stupid?
Well, that's a 3, 2, 1 record.
I did.
All right, do it again, but this time when you say one, I'll start.
That was the point. What did you want me to do? You told me to do a
I thought you were
countdown.
gonna say, I thought you were gonna go 3, 2, 1 live or something to that effect.
Okay, I don't know if you've ever witnessed any live production. They don't do the thing after. Well, actually, they usually don't even do one. They go 3, 2, and then they leave it so they don't accidentally record any early
Okay.
audio.
Well, how about this time you say one and then I'll start
That's
after
what I
you say
thought would
one.
happen. Fuck.